For 3 centuries, I have chronicled the stories of countless warriors, legends of strength, bravery, and conquest. From the Battle of the Seven Suns to the Siege of Proxima, I've witnessed civilizations crumble and commanders whose fleets could eclipse entire star systems. I have seen weapons that could reduce planets to ashes and armies that struck terror across the galaxy. Yet none of this compares to the fear brought on by one human female, Hazel. It may sound absurd, as it did to me when I first heard the rumors. How could a single human, a woman barely taller than a juvenile Xenian, cause such panic in the hearts of the galaxy's fiercest warriors? The answer, dear reader, is not in strength, skill, or weaponry. No, it lies in something far more unsettling, a human expression called a smile. Let me take you back to the year 2847, according to human time. The Galactic Coalition was on the brink of collapse, the greatest crisis since the Nexus Wars. 17 species, each powerful in its own right, were holding together a fragile alliance. Tensions were high as trade routes were contested, territories squabbled over, and ancient rivalries simmered just beneath the surface. Into this turmoil entered the Drain Empire, ancient, proud, and convinced of their unparalleled might. Their warriors stood 3 meters tall, their bodies hardened with natural armor, their ships fortified like moving citadels, and their weapons the stuff of legends. The Drain had declared their intention to restore order to the galaxy, which, to them, meant wiping out the chaos they saw in the Coalition. In a desperate bid to prevent war, the Coalition appointed Earth's diplomatic corps to mediate. And who did they send? Hazel, a human woman who had already earned a reputation for resolving the Plutonian mining dispute without firing a single shot, though a few Martian barons did mysteriously retire and vanish to the outer colonies afterward. I will never forget the first time I saw her walk into the Great Hall of Arbitration on Station Zero. She wore a black business suit, perfectly tailored, and heels that clicked on the crystalline floor with a rhythm so precise it made even the bravest warriors' hearts falter. Her hair, the color of a burning star, was pulled back into a strict bun, but it was her expression that seized everyone's attention. A serene, controlled look, one of polite interest, the kind humans sometimes show when they're dealing with matters that don't quite concern them but are nonetheless amusing. The Drain delegation, led by Supreme Commander Vex Thor, were the first to laugh. "You send this Vex Thor?" His voice thundered, filling the vast hall. "This small creature to negotiate with the might of the Drain Empire?" And Hazel's response? She smiled. Now, it is crucial for me to explain something about human expressions, especially for those who may not fully understand. Unlike most species, whose emotional cues are simple and direct, threats, submission, mating signals, humans have developed a more complex system. They can show teeth in various situations, and the meaning of this gesture can range from joy to sarcasm to, as the galaxy would soon find out, an overwhelming certainty of dominance. Hazel's smile that day wasn't a broad, menacing grin. It wasn't the kind of smile that foreshadows a fight or a challenge. It was small, subtle, but more terrifying than anything I had ever seen. It was the smile of someone who knew something others didn't, and who found the ignorance of those around her amusing. It was the smile of a predator who had already won. I watched in disbelief as Vex Thor, the legendary supreme commander of the most fearsome military force in the galaxy, took a hesitant step back. His secondary breathing vents flared, a clear sign of alarm and discomfort for his species. And that, my friends, marked the beginning of what would come to be known as the Smile Incident, a diplomatic engagement that forever altered how the galaxy would regard these strange, terrifying creatures known as humans. The first formal meeting between the Drain Empire and the human legation was set for what humans call breakfast time. This, I would soon realize, was Hazel's first move in her carefully crafted strategy. You see, Drain biology requires no less than 6 hours of intense combat simulations to reach peak mental acuity. By scheduling the meeting at the equivalent of 0500 hours, Hazel had already put them at a severe disadvantage. Supreme Commander Vex Thor arrived with his usual entourage, 12 elite guards, each wielding firepower capable of decimating an entire moon. They marched into the conference room of Station Zero, their heavy armor clanging against the specially reinforced seats made to accommodate their immense frames. The other representatives of the coalition lined the walls, the gaseous flans in their containment spheres, the serpentine scion coiled upon their perches, and the crystalline lamini shifting colors in what I recognized as anxious anticipation. Hazel, however, sat alone at her side of the table, a steaming cup of something humans call coffee in front of her. That same small, knowing smile played across her face as she watched the Drain delegation settle. She had chosen not to have any guards, which initially struck everyone as suicidal. But now, as I observed her composure, I was beginning to wonder who was truly in danger. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality that was both impeccably polite and somehow vaguely menacing. relaxing. I took the liberty of having the kitchen prepare refreshments suitable for drain physiology, Hazel said, with a glint of amusement in her eyes. Vex Thor glared at the offered beverages. We do not require sustenance during negotiations. Hazel took a slow sip of her coffee. How interesting. I read in the historical archives that drain warriors traditionally share a victory drink before battle. Are we not engaging in a form of combat here, Supreme Commander? The room fell into an eerie silence. Even the flans ceased their usual atmospheric movement. Hazel had just made a statement that could either be seen as a brilliant cultural insight or an incredibly rude provocation. No one could quite tell which. Vex Thor's facial plates shifted, signaling confusion. You consider this combat? Everything's combat, Supreme Commander, Hazel replied, taking another sip of coffee and smiling. Some of us just prefer weapons that don't go boom. I watched as a few of Vex Thor's guards visibly shifted, clearly unnerved. It was becoming increasingly apparent that the humans had been studying their counterparts, and they had done so with meticulous care. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in what humans call psychological warfare. Hazel never raised her voice, never issued a direct threat. She simply sat there, smiling, as she deconstructed every single one of the Drain Empire's demands with surgical precision. Your proposal to establish military bases in coalition space is interesting, she remarked with that same unwavering smile, especially given the Relian incident of 2843. You recall that one, don't you, Supreme Commander? The time when a certain Drain battle group somehow found itself lost and ended up in a restricted sector. Vex Thor's armor groaned with tension. That was a navigational error. Of course it was. Hazel's smile curled just a fraction wider. Just like the Proxima Centauri patrol that accidentally scanned our quantum research facilities last month. So many accidents, it seems. One might almost think the mighty Drain Empire might want to invest in more reliable navigation systems. A low growl rumbled through the Drain delegation, and one of the guards instinctively reached for his weapon. But he froze the moment Hazel turned that same smile directly toward him. Oh please, she said softly, I would love to see how the Coalition Assembly would respond to a Drain warrior drawing a weapon during peaceful negotiations. The political fallout would be fascinating. The guard's hand snapped back to his side so quickly I thought he might have injured himself. The other Coalition representatives watched this exchange with a mix of horror and awe. The Scion, usually so composed and ever swiveling on their perches, had forgotten to maintain their characteristic sway, their bodies frozen in place. The Lumini, who are rarely anything but shimmering in hues of calm, had turned a uniform shade of what I later learned humans refer to as puke green, a color utterly foreign to their species. But it was the flans who truly captured my attention. Their containment spheres, normally a constant, smooth hum, began vibrating ever so slightly, the sign of a species struggling to suppress laughter. At least they seemed to understand what was unfolding before them. The mighty Drain Empire, terror of the galaxy, was being dismantled with surgical precision by a human woman armed only with a cup of coffee and an expression that made it seem as though she knew not only the deepest secrets of everyone in the room, but exactly how to exploit them. Perhaps, Hazel suggested after another hour of this psychological disintegration, we should take a short recess? I imagine standing at attention for so long must be tiring, especially for warriors of your considerable stature. She glanced pointedly at Vex Thor's guards, some of whom were clearly struggling to remain upright in their heavy armor, which was ill-suited for long diplomatic sessions. Vex Thor, his facial plates audibly grinding in agitation, seized on the suggestion with an almost desperate eagerness. Yes, a recess to consider your points. As the Drain delegation filed out, something remarkable caught my eye. They were all careful, exceedingly careful, not to turn their backs on Hazel. These were beings who could stare down supernovae without flinching, yet they treated this small human woman as though she might materialize behind them if they dared to look away. Just before exiting, Vex Thor paused at the door. You are not what we expected, human. Hazel's smile, that same, ever-present smile. How disappointing, she said. We so dislike being predictable. Once the room emptied, I saw Hazel's smile finally begin to fade. For just a moment, she looked down at her now empty coffee cup with a slight expression of mild annoyance, something I would come to recognize as a rare glimpse of vulnerability. Krav Thul, she called out, startling me. I hadn't realized she had noticed my presence in the observation alcove. Would you be so kind as to show me where I might get a refill? I have a feeling the afternoon session is going to require quite a bit of caffeine. As I led her to the station's commissary, I couldn't help but notice how every species we passed gave her a wide berth. Word of the morning's events had already spread, and the human who had smiled in the face of the Drain Empire was rapidly becoming a legend. And we weren't even halfway through the first day of negotiations. When the afternoon session began, the tension in the chamber was almost palpable, filling the room like an electric charge. Even my recording devices seemed to pick up on the charged atmosphere, humming with the anticipation that buzzed in the air. The Drain delegation returned with reinforcements, 20 guards this time, up from 12, an unmistakable sign that Supreme Commander Vex Thor was feeling threatened by a single unarmed human. Hazel noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "My, what a crowd we have now," she remarked, casually sipping her freshly refilled coffee. "Should I have brought some friends too? Though I suppose that's unnecessary, isn't it? After all," she let her smile widen ever so slightly. "We already have footage of your ships moving into position around Station Zero." Vex Thor's facial plates clicked rapidly, the Drain equivalent of a stunned gasp. "How did you know?" Hazel set her cup down with deliberate care. "Supreme Commander, did you truly believe we wouldn't notice 30 Drain warships trying to slip through the Kina Nebula? Your cloaking technology is quite impressive, but it does have a signature, a quantum signature, that is, especially when your engineers forget to account for the interference caused by nebula conditions." The guards shifted uncomfortably. A few coalition representatives began to edge toward the exits. "Is this a threat?" Vex Thor demanded, rising to his towering full height. At 3 meters, he loomed over Hazel's seated form. "A threat?" Hazel responded. "Oh no, Supreme Commander, just an observation. For instance, I noticed that your fleet's current formation would be highly effective in a direct assault, but it leaves your ventral shields dangerously exposed, especially to, say, a fleet of stealth vessels hiding in the asteroid belt of the nearby Thorian system." The color drained from Vex Thor's facial plates. The Thorian system? There were no human ships there, I would later learn. But at that moment, not a single being in the room doubted Hazel's words. "You're bluffing," one of the guards growled, his voice dripping with uncertainty. Hazel turned that smile directly toward him. "Would you like to test that theory?" The guard faltered, his resolve crumbling. "I'm sure your family would be proud to hear how you gambled their lives based on your assessment of human military capabilities," he whimpered. What followed was 3 hours of the most brilliant diplomatic maneuvering I've ever witnessed. Hazel never once raised her voice, never made an overt threat. She simply sat there, smiling and making pointed observations about Drain fleet movements, secret military bases, and even personal details about various commanders that left them squirming in their seats. "It's fascinating, really," she said at one point, as if casually inspecting her perfectly manicured nails, "how the Drain Empire manages to maintain such a formidable military presence despite the recent strain on your dilithium supplies. Those mines on Real 7 must be incredibly productive, though I imagine the Relian government would be quite interested in learning about them, given that they believe the sector is uninhabited." Vex Thor's massive fist came crashing down on the table. "Enough! These games, these FA," Hazel interrupted, unfazed. "I do love facts, Supreme Commander, like the fact that your military budget has increased by 300% in the past 5 years, while public infrastructure spending has dropped by half. Or perhaps we could discuss the fact that 3 of your colony worlds are on the verge of rebellion. Or would you prefer to talk about the fact that your Council of Generals is planning to silence?" Vex Thor's roar shook the entire chamber, causing the lights to flicker and hum. Hazel didn't even flinch. Instead, she did something that would go down in history as one of the most legendary moments in the galaxy. She laughed. It wasn't a loud, mocking laugh, but one filled with quiet, unsettling amusement. A laugh that resonated in the hearts of everyone present. A laugh that made it clear that Hazel wasn't simply winning. She had already won. Hazel laughed, but not nervously, not in hysteria. Genuine amusement, as if Vex Thor was nothing more than a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, Supreme Commander," she said, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. "Has anyone ever told you how adorable you are when you're trying to be intimidating?" The room fell into an oppressive silence. Even the environmental systems seemed to hold their breath. Calling the Supreme Commander of the Drain Empire adorable was akin to calling a supernova a gentle breeze. But Hazel wasn't finished yet. She stood up, straightened her perfectly tailored suit, and walked straight up to Vex Thor. Though she barely reached his chest, there was an air of authority in her steps, and somehow, impossibly, she made it feel as though she was looking down at him. "Let me be clear," she said, still wearing that terrifying smile. "Every secret you think you have, we know it. Every move you plan to make, we've already anticipated it. Every weakness you've tried to hide, we've documented it. You're not here to negotiate, Supreme Commander. You're here to learn your place in the galaxy. And your place is not threatening the coalition, Hazel turned to walk back to her seat, then paused, her smile never fading. "Oh, and those ships of yours surrounding the station? They should be receiving some rather interesting data about now. Nothing harmful, just a detailed analysis of their structural weaknesses. Consider it a gift, a demonstration of human thoroughness." Right on cue, alarms erupted from communicators around the room. Drain officers were receiving frantic messages from their ships, reporting that their supposedly secure systems were now displaying detailed schematics of their own vulnerabilities. The other coalition species watched in stunned silence, their reactions a mix of terror and revelation. The Flans, unable to contain themselves, had stopped pretending not to laugh and were now vibrating visibly in their containment spheres. The Scion had assumed their recording for posterity's stance, making sure not to miss a single moment of this historic humiliation. But it was the Lumini who truly grasped what was happening. Their crystalline forms began resonating at a frequency that indicated deep appreciation. It was then that they understood humans, not warriors who thrived on destruction, but predators who had evolved beyond the need for violence. Why destroy your enemies when you could simply reveal every way you could destroy them if you wished to? Vex Thor, the mightiest warrior in known space, slumped heavily into his chair. His facial plates had gone completely still, an unmistakable sign of defeat in Drain body language. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice little more than a whisper. Hazel's smile softened, almost, but not quite. "Why, exactly what we said we wanted at the beginning. Fair trade agreements, respect for coalition borders, and perhaps," her eyes gleamed mischievously, "a public apology for that unfortunate navigational error in the Relian sector." As I watched the once mighty Drain Empire crumble before a human smile, I realized something profound. We had all been so focused on humanity's physical frailty, their short lifespans, their fragile bodies, that we had failed to recognize what they had evolved into, something far more dangerous than claws or armor. They had evolved the ability to make even the strongest warriors in the universe destroy themselves. By the final day of negotiations, the council chamber was alive with a quiet hum of anticipation. The galaxy would never be the same. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire across coalition space, and representatives from every species arrived, not to participate, but to witness what promised to be a historic event. Hazel arrived exactly on time, wearing a dark blue suit that made her appear both professional and somehow predatory. She carried no datapad, no notes, just a single cup of coffee and that eternal, unsettling smile. Behind her walked two junior human diplomats, carrying what appeared to be an ornate wooden box. When Supreme Commander Vex Thor entered, the change in him was almost unrecognizable. His normally gleaming armor was dull and scratched, his movements slow and hesitant. The proud, mighty warrior who had once commanded the most feared fleet in the galaxy now looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. As I would later learn, he hadn't. "Good morning, Supreme Commander," Hazel said brightly. "I trust you received my gift?" Vex Thor's facial plates trembled. The gift she referred to had been delivered to his private quarters the previous night, a complete dossier detailing every secret meeting, every private conversation, every hidden agreement he'd made over the past decade. Information even his own command staff wasn't privy to. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know these things?" Hazel's smile widened just a fraction. "Supreme Commander, did you really believe those human maintenance workers on your ships were only there to fix environmental systems? Or that the Drain officers who visited Earth for cultural exchange were only learning about our music? We humans have a saying, the best place to hide is in plain sight." A low murmur swept through the gathered diplomats. The implications were staggering. How many other secrets did the humans know? How long had they been gathering information? "You've been spying on us," Vex Thor accused, but there was no anger in his voice, only resignation. "Spying?" Hazel's laugh rang out again, soft but chilling. "No, Supreme Commander, we've been making friends. Your junior officers love talking about their work, especially after a few drinks. Your maintenance crews are quite proud of their ships and are always happy to discuss specifications. We just listen." She gestured to her assistants, who stepped forward with the wooden box. "Speaking of listening," Hazel continued, "would you like to hear a recording of your conversation with General Kex about the planned coup? The audio quality is excellent." Vex Thor staggered back. "You wouldn't dare." Hazel's smile turned razor sharp. "You're right," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I wouldn't because I don't need to. You're going to sign the treaty, acknowledge coalition sovereignty, and withdraw your forces voluntarily. Because you now understand something that everyone else in this room knows. Humans don't need threats. We just need to smile and let you imagine what we could do. The box, I would later learn, was empty, a mere prop in humanity's greatest performance. The terms are simple, Hazel continued, as though nothing had changed, pulling a document from thin air. The Drain Empire will respect coalition borders, establish fair trade agreements, and issue a formal apology for past misunderstandings. In return, we keep smiling. And believe me, Supreme Commander, you want us to keep smiling? Vex Thor stared at the document for a long, drawn-out moment. Then, in a move that would forever be etched into every historical archive in the galaxy, he dropped to one knee before Hazel, the mighty Supreme Commander of the Drain Empire, the warrior who had once struck fear into the hearts of the entire galaxy, now voluntarily assuming a position of submission before a human female who barely reached a third of his height. We sign, Vex Thor said quietly, his voice filled with a kind of weary acceptance. We sign because only fools wage war against shadows. And you humans, you are the shadow that smiles. Hazel's expression softened for the first time in the entire meeting, a moment of genuine emotion that no one had expected to see. A wise decision, Supreme Commander, she said, her voice warm, almost soothing. Perhaps now we can discuss more pleasant matters. I hear your eldest daughter is quite interested in Earth's agricultural techniques. Vex Thor's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. How did you? Supreme Commander, Hazel said, her smile returning, sharper than before. I look forward to a long and peaceful relationship between our peoples, one where we can all smile together. The treaty was signed within the hour. As the Drain delegation began to prepare their departure, Hazel approached Vex Thor one last time. Oh, and Supreme Commander, her smile now positively radiant, do give my regards to General Kex. Tell him the weather on Proxima 2 is lovely this time of year, perfect for retirement. Vex Thor practically fled from the chamber, his once imposing presence reduced to hurried steps as he left in silence. The coalition representatives remained still, stunned, for several minutes. Finally, a Scion ambassador found the courage to ask the question that had been on everyone's mind. Was any of it true? They asked, their voice trembling slightly. The ships in the Thorin system, the spies, the recordings? Hazel simply smiled and took another sip of her coffee. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying answer of all. That day, everything changed. The Galactic Coalition entered a new era, one where the threat of physical warfare diminished, replaced by something far more subtle, far more insidious. Suddenly, every species was desperate to maintain good relations with Earth. Trade agreements were signed at unprecedented speed. Cultural exchange programs flourished. And if anyone noticed that human diplomats seemed to have an uncanny knowledge of every species' business, well, they just smiled and moved on. The Drain Empire underwent a radical transformation. Supreme Commander Vex Thor retired just 2 weeks after the treaty was signed, citing a desire to spend more time with his family. General Kex disappeared entirely, though rumors suggested he had relocated to a quiet farming colony on Proxima 2, where he developed an unexpected interest in botany. But the true shift came in the galaxy's perception of humanity. We had always seen them as physically weak, their short lifespans a fleeting moment in the span of our centuries-long existences. But now, we understood that humans had evolved something far more potent than armor or claws. They had perfected the art of waging war without violence, conquering without weapons, and dominating without destruction. A human smile became both a greeting and a warning. You could never tell whether they were genuinely pleased to see you, or if they had just uncovered every secret you tried to hide. As for Hazel, she continued her diplomatic career, resolving conflicts across the galaxy with nothing more than a cup of coffee and that terrible, wonderful smile. Some even said she never needed the coffee. It was just another prop in humanity's grand performance. I've spent decades studying the events of those few days, trying to understand the true power of humanity. The conclusion I've reached is both simple and terrifying. Humans are not the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. They don't need to be. They've simply perfected the art of letting others defeat themselves. Yesterday, I received a message from Earth's diplomatic corps, inviting me to a friendly gathering to discuss my historical research. The message was signed with a smiley face. I've already packed my bags. This is Krav Thul, Chief Historian of the Galactic Warriors Archive, signing off. And if you're human and reading this, well, I'm sure you're smiling right now.